Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with another video. It is February 18th, Wednesday, and I'd like to talk about a book that a friend of mine just sent me. He wrote a book called America's Hijacked Peace Dividend, Long Overdue and Immediately Payable by John Rachel. He's been a long time writer and activist and involved in peace issues, and he asked me to review this book, so that's what I'm doing. What I'm going to be doing actually is going over the 5 parts of the book, just explain what they are. I'll be going into mostly part 1 and part 5 because those are the parts that talk specifically about the peace dividend. And he also has a text of an actual contract that he is urging people to give to potential candidates for Congress or senator or whatever political office they're aspiring to, and essentially demanding that they institute a peace dividend. So, and I'll be reading extensively from his book. It's 180 odd pages. The most important excerpts I'm reading, and I'm also going to be interspersing my comments, so you'll get the sense of what my observations are of it. So the topics are, first of all, part 1 is endless wars. What is the peace dividend? It's a rational, focused, effective, game-changing strategy for ending the military madness and to have peace bonds and peace dollars, a new direction for America. The second part is the world's only superpower. He talks about what happened after the Soviet Union ended. Part 3 is our history of chaos and carnage, and we won't get fooled again. He talks about, the many invasions and coups and so on that the U.S. has been involved in, which we've essentially paid for unknowingly or unwillingly, or both. Part 4 is about war pigs, chicken hawks, and whores of empire, the bully on the block. That should be pretty self-explanatory. When he talks about chicken hawks, and I'm thinking particularly of a certain senator from South Carolina who's really chomping at the bit to go to war, but he looks like if he got into battle, he'd be the first one to chicken out. And part 5 is the peace dividend. The U.S. public takes control of its destiny, the peace dividend, and a candidate contract. So I'm going to plow in here, and I'm going to be reading his main excerpts that I found from the book, and then I'll intersperse my own comments. So first of all, he says, our leaders have become drunk on power, addicted to aggression, mentally unstable prima donnas, immersed in delusions of world empire, imprisoned in the bubble of their own megalomania, insularity, and personal sense of importance and entitlement. They are pathologically habituated to recklessness, hubris, and confrontation. They are seriously sick. And, hubris is the idea, it comes from the Greek, where somebody is so arrogant that they overstep their bounds, and as they say, pride goeth before a fall. So that's what we're headed for, according to John. We in America, especially, were to be the beneficiaries of this victory over the Soviet Union, the only nation in our history capable of destroying us, since far less of the military spending necessary to maintain our nuclear arsenal and vast offensive and defensive weapon system was required now that the Soviet threat was gone. My comment, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Henry Wallace made common cause with the Soviet Union. It was Churchill and the U.S. deep state with their fascist sympathies and visceral hatred of all things Russian that manufactured Cold War hysteria. That's how I see it. All the conflicts, going back to John here, all the conflicts, interventions, rescue missions, bombing raids, invasions, proxy wars, and direct wars were completely and totally unnecessary. I agree. After causing so much carnage and destruction, America is now regarded internationally not as a beacon of justice and hope, but as a major threat to peace on the planet. Now, who benefited from all this? You're not going to like this, as John says. The same people who always benefit from war and other people's misery. The rich and the powerful, the wealthy investors with stockholding in Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, SAIC, General Dynamics, Honeywell, and so on. And I'll interject here that one time, this is in around 1982, we were holding a vigil for nuclear disarmament because of the danger of nuclear war at that time. And a woman, we had this big sign, it said Vigil for Nuclear Disarmament. We were down in the San Francisco Financial District, and this woman says, I own stock in Lockheed, as if planning for a life-ending, a planet-ending nuclear holocaust is good for business. These people are, and this is just an average person. It's good for my portfolio. Who cares if we all get blown to shreds? So for 34 years, that's since the time the Soviet Union ended, instead of being given a peace dividend, which we were promised, we were subjected to the biggest scam in the history of the world. American taxpayers were ripped off for more than $9.12 trillion. That's 9.12 trillion with a T. And I'll go so far as to say that it was probably more than that. As I say, see below, it's not just that these expenditures were unnecessary, they were also an excuse for massive financial embezzlement and criminality. All these unnecessary wars, none of it was the result of honest mistakes, miscalculations, misunderstandings, errors in judgment. No, they were all intentional, carefully cultivated fruits of calculated deceptions, patently misleading propaganda, shrewdly designed ruses, premeditated lies, false narratives, disinformation campaigns, and massive brainwashing. The U.S. spent tens of billions of dollars manufacturing 66,500 such nuclear weapons, then scrapped almost 90% of them, which was a good thing. But of course, the tons of money were spent, and that meant that most of it was completely and totally wasted. Make no mistake about it. Tons of money were pocketed from this lunacy. And I'll mention that, JFK actually campaigned on the so-called missile gap. He was saying that the Soviet Union was ahead of us in missiles, when in fact the opposite was true. So John talks about the peace dividend strategy. He says, until we the people legally take the power from those who now commandeer the machinery for setting foreign policy, who shape our military priorities and agenda, who currently view themselves as the indispensable, infallible rulers of the planet, until we the people are able to decide the direction of our country, create a legal and economic framework which serves all the people, not just the rich and powerful, the U.S. will continue to bully other countries, topple governments, kill innocent people for political, geopolitical advantage and profit. The approach of the peace dividend strategy is simple and direct. Just tell people the truth. Tell the truth about our endless wars and bloated Department of Defense budgets. Expose the whole defense industry game for what it is. It's an enormous con. The approach of the peace dividend strategy is simple and direct. Just tell people the truth. Tell the truth about the endless wars and the bloated DoD budgets. And then crucially, we connect all this fraud and waste to the rough times people are going through. War is making us poor. Trillions and trillions of dollars wasted. Manufactured crises. Manufactured consent. And then crucially, we connect all this fraud and waste to the rough times people are going through. War is making us poor. We demand our money back. The peace dividend refund currently totals $27,522 for each and every living U.S. citizen, according to his calculation. It's everyday citizens getting back money which never should have been taken from them in the first place, and putting that money back in their bank accounts where it belongs. How can we get our military, our economy, our government back on track? We make it simple. Only vote for peace dividend candidates. If we can get a veto-proof majority in the House and the Senate, when these newly elected representatives go to Washington, D.C., and pass the peace dividend legislation, everything changes. The Peace Dividend Project has a very specific objective: stop the war machine before it destroys the country and possibly ends all life on the planet. That's our main goal. My comment: where is the money and organization going to come from to create that veto-proof majority? Every social movement, from anti-slavery to labor rights, women's right to vote, civil rights, anti-war, has been met with massive suppression by the same people who've been perpetrating this since the very beginning of the American United States of America. He continues, deficit spending, which has been the focus of acrimonious debates, theatrical ultimatums, and government shuts down, and a celebrated hand grenade tossed back and forth in the political blame game, is both unnecessary and entirely intentional. The crucial impact of the peace dividend is that it decisively remedies the fiscal recklessness. Were people to wake up to what's really going on with our military madness, imperial delusions of world empire, and the ruthless oppression of everyday citizens under a carefully crafted, systematic, propaganda-fueled, entirely orchestrated regime of totalitarian control by the deep state, prompted by literally a handful of rich and powerful elites, heads would roll. Our sincere hope is that the urgently required regime change is still possible without violence. We achieve this by replacing any uncooperative legislators with ones who understand that their obligations are first and foremost to their constituents, that being elected to represent us. Demands that they actually will represent us, putting our welfare and the health of our families and communities ahead of all else. We propose the peace dividend as a decisive test. It's a line in the sand. If a candidate won't support it by signing an ironclad contract to guarantee his or her support, which he or she will honor as legally binding, then we will find one who will. He talks about peace bonds. Many older readers, like myself, will remember U.S. savings bonds, where we can raise money for war. We sure as hell can raise money for peace. Peace bonds would be made available to the U.S. citizens, providing an opportunity to invest in a peaceful America, meaning only non-military projects and initiatives. So these U.S. savings bonds were the equivalent of, you could buy them like at a post office or something, and you just held on to it until maturity, and it had a fixed rate of interest, and then you would cash it in. Very safe and very, very easy to do. Now, one alternative to this, which I'm suggesting, is that you can have a government savings bank. So if you have a savings bank that's owned by the government, people can put their money in there, get a reasonable rate of return, and the money in that bank would be used only to finance small businesses, local businesses, home mortgages for families and so on. And that would be a variant of this idea of peace bonds. And peace dollars is this is a renewal of the core values upon which our nation was founded. As the name peace dollars implies, it is the utilization of our most basic monetary instrument, specifically the promotion of peace. Now, Abraham Lincoln used greenbacks, the paper currency shown in his text, backed by nothing more than the confidence in the government to finance the Civil War. Then, a century later, on June 4th in 1963, John F. Kennedy signed Executive Order 11110, which set in motion the issuance of silver certificate notes, currency backed by silver reserves being held at that time by the U.S. Treasury. And I remember, actually, I owned a couple of these quote-unquote silver certificates. And basically it says you could walk into any U.S. bank, hand them a silver certificate and say, give me silver. It was literally exchangeable for silver. So there's no question that what both Lincoln and Kennedy did, while anathema to the private banking interests, was entirely legal. In fact, progressive economists would argue that money creation never should have been ceded to the private banks in the first place. Moreover, that it is incumbent on our current elected officials to again secure absolute control of the currency. So the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank is probably unconstitutional since it is a private, not public bank. It was created as a consortium of bankers set up the Federal Reserve Bank, but it's not actually it's a quasi-independent part of the U.S. government, but it's not really controlled by the U.S. government. So our current debt-driven system requiring us to borrow from the private banking institution, misleadingly called the Federal Reserve, in order to inject money into the economy is absurd and over the long term counterproductive, arguably suicidal for the economy. So the Federal Reserve basically creates debt that the U.S. government buys, and then that's how we finance everything. And now that we're in $38 trillion in debt, and how are we going to ever pay that back? So the whole concept of the Federal Reserve Bank was a mistake from the beginning, but it certainly made bankers rich. Now, peace dollars exclusively promote America's domestic economy. That is, they only buy goods and services made in the USA. This precludes the exporting of any newly generated peace dividend wealth, a practice which would only exacerbate our already excessive trade deficit and facilitate capital flight from the economy. The insulting reality is, when it comes to the government budgeting and spending, except for the mostly empty ritual of voting only every 2 years, we everyday citizens are never consulted, much less do we ever give our specific consent on vital decisions made in our name. This is a colossal disconnect from what is putatively called a democracy. So here's an aside here. So I thought, well, okay, what do they mean by democracy? So I went into the internet and I did a little research, and I asked, why does the U.S. say it's the world's greatest democracy when the word democracy doesn't even appear in the Constitution? So here's some thoughts on that. The term has evolved. While the founders established a republic, the word democracy has become the common shorthand for representative government in modern usage. It's common shorthand for it is not the actual thing. Today, democracy typically refers to any system where power derives from the people through elections, whether direct or representative. The term has evolved. Marketing and identity, democracy became a powerful rallying term, especially during the 20th century conflicts against fascism and communism. It's catchier and more emotionally resonant than constitutional republic for describing American values of popular sovereignty and individual rights. The U.S. system contains democratic elements within the current system. It has elected representatives, voting rights, majority rule with minority protections, but technically it is a constitutional republic. It functions as a representative democracy, so the terms are often used interchangeably in everyday language. Now, I want to point something out here, which is that, of course, we call ourselves a democracy, but this book here is called American Exception, and it says Empire in the Deep State. It explains that there is the outer facade of democracy, but the real decisions are made either by the big banks and big corporations or by the deep state, the CIA and those red letter agencies that are certainly not elected. None of them are elected. So the whole idea of democracy is really a sham. But don't tell that to your local representative because they don't like to hear that. Now, the U.S. system contains elements of voting rights, but technically it is not a democracy. The founders were actually wary of pure democracy, fearing tyranny of the majority. They designed checks and balances, the Electoral College, and the Senate structure specifically to temper direct popular will. But this nuance gets lost in modern political rhetoric. So while we can say that democracy isn't in the Constitution, the term has become the popular brand for describing systems of government based on popular consent and electoral representation. So the point is that the word democracy is really a marketing term. It is not a factual description of what our system of government is. And isn't it interesting that you have, let's take a case of two Muslim countries. You have the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is our close ally, and we have to protect the kingdom of Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates. These are all super wealthy oil-rich countries that are ruled by super rich families. There's not a hint of democracy in them, and yet you have the Islamic Republic of Iran, which they do have elections for president, but they're considered illegitimate by the United States because the mullahs, that is the religious authorities, or let's put it this way, a rather small group of people decides on who is eligible to run or not. Now, compare that with the Republican and Democratic parties. You have a group of people who decide who is going to run and who is not. And if you're a Bernie Sanders or a Jesse Jackson, who just died, or a Jill Stein, the mullahs, the financial mullahs of the United States decide that, sorry, you don't qualify, you're not going to be able to run, even though there may be a great popular appeal for a Bernie Sanders. So what's going on here that the United States brags about being a democracy when a country like Iran is derided and a country like Saudi Arabia is praised? It's very strange, don't you think? So he goes on, starting with a question: in a democratic country, government of the people, by the people, for the people. That was Abraham Lincoln's description. Who owns the government's money? Generally speaking, either money is privately owned, that is people, companies, corporations, investment banks, or it's publicly owned. The question then is if through taxes, bonds, borrowing, printing, digital creation, money is deposited in the U.S. Treasury for later disbursement, whose money is it? Who actually owns the money before it's sent on its way to pay the bills, salaries, benefits, and so on? It is we, the people, who have original and overriding control, ownership of what passes through the Treasury and where that money goes. After all, it is our tax dollars which are collected and pooled to fund the government. It is in our name that the bonds are floated, and it is the U.S. who are directly obligated to repay at some future time the money borrowed to meet budgetary demands. It seems reasonable to conclude that until that money is dispersed for whatever reason is on its way to creditors or the states or government contractors, or paid as salaries to federal employees, or sent to anyone who has a legitimate claim for payment, the money which is in the vaults and accounts of our government is ours. In an important sense, that money is a collectivized, it is subject to joint and collective ownership. Before it is collected, as it's collected, when it's collected, and it is sitting in the U.S. Treasury. This applies to infrastructure and physical assets as well. Granted, we individually have no right to claim a chunk of asphalt from an interstate highway or one of the fingers from the statue of Abraham Lincoln overlooking the Capitol Mall. We collectively own such items and consent to leave it in trust so that we collectively can enjoy our common property, whatever its agreed purpose. Why should we look at the hard, cold cash inside the Treasury vaults or Fort Knox any differently? Our timidity and imagined powerlessness create the monster the federal government has become. Our accepting the false narrative of the two-party system has all but destroyed democracy. Our letting our leaders feed us lies without retribution. In fact, our rewarding our leaders for misleading and abusing us is putting nails in our own coffins. Allowing ourselves to be scammed out of trillions of dollars, allowing an already incomprehensibly rich ruling class year after year to skim money from our family budgets, out of our wallets, stealing our hard-earned dollars to fight wars and pursue delusions of world conquest is criminal and insane. It mocks our dignity as human beings, our basic decency, our fundamental rights as American citizens to share in the enormous wealth of our country. The American public needs to wake up. So you're an American citizen. You deserve respect. Yes, we can expect desperate cries of outrage to issue from the solemn faces of the plutocracy, both with respect to our peace dividend and the means proposed here for funding it. But the truth is, you deserve better. You deserve respect and fairness. You don't deserve to be used and abused. The peace dividend is a proper refund for a defective product. It's your money being returned to you to put to good use, building a better life, stronger communities, a productive and robust economy, an America that works for all of us, not just the rich and powerful. Put your future congressman, your future senator, every candidate now running for president, and put them all on notice. If they can't get behind rectifying this gross injustice against American taxpayers, against you and me, then we will find somebody else who will. Go to our organizational sites, this is John's speaking here, and join the movement to save our country from the warmongers and predators. He gives two websites, peacedividend.us and warismakinguspore.com. Now, I'm going to make a comment on the underlying problem, which is massive corruption, especially in the Department of Defense. John talks about the $9.12 trillion that we're owed, but I would submit to you that it's a much deeper problem. It turns out that there were several congressional hearings from 2001 to 2003, and probably subsequently, that addressed financial management issues of the Department of Defense. And below is a summary of these hearings, along with the pertinent quotes and their authors. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I've been following this for a long time. Back in 2001, I saw this press conference with Donald Rumsfeld, then the Secretary of Defense, and he said in public that $2.3 trillion was unaccounted for in the defense budget, and people were shocked. And the next day, 9/11 happened, and the commission that Donald Rumsfeld presumably set up to investigate all this had offices in the Pentagon. But strangely enough, whatever hit the Pentagon happened to hit their offices, and all their computers were blown to bits, and the investigation never went forward. That was reported by Global Research way back then. So I'm quite familiar with this issue, and I thought I should bring it to your attention in the context of this issue that John is bringing up. So the search results for the hearings on the Department of Defense financial management point to a number of let's see, is 1, 2, 3, 4, six quotes by various representatives and also the head of the General Accounting Office. So I'm going to be reading what they have to say. These are transcripts and statements from these hearings, and they contain strong language from members of the Congress describing a systemic culture of mismanagement at the Pentagon. So it's not just the fact that the decision to make the expenditures is made by Congress. It's how Pentagon spends the money that's even just as bad or worse. So here is Representative Jan Schakowsky, a Democrat of Illinois, and she was a ranking member on the relevant subcommittees and was a persistent and vocal critic of the Department of Defense's financial practices. So on June 25th, 2022, she opened a hearing by stating, "The financial abuses that have occurred at the Pentagon and the DoD's lack of initiative and unwillingness to change its financial management practices are disgraceful." In a hearing on July 26th, she expressed her frustration again. This is 2001. "I don't know what it's going to take to give top-level Department of Defense officials a wake-up call. This infuriates me, and I think the American people will be infuriated as well." Again, on September 19th, 2002, she directly links the DoD's failures to the broader issue of government accountability. She said, "If we don't clean up financial management of the Department of Defense, then all of the rest of this is a wasted effort." This is a Republican, Representative Todd Platts of Pennsylvania. At the start of a hearing on June 25th, 2003, he noted, "This year, 21 of 24 agencies mandated by the CFO Act to perform financial audits earned an unqualified or clean opinion. The Department of Defense, one of the three entities not receiving a clean audit, will be the focus of today's hearing." And then you have the General Accounting Office, the GAO, and one of their directors is named Gregory D. Cutts. And he reported on July 26, 2001, a number of the deep-seated nature of the problems. He said, "After having performed hundreds of reviews of major weapon systems over the last 20 years, we have seen many of the same problems recur: cost increase, schedule delays, performance shortfalls. These problems have proven resistant to reform, in part because underlying incentives have not changed." So there you go. We have a huge problem in this country. It is not simply the policies that have been pursued to create wars, fomenting wars everywhere. It's also just the nature of how the Department of Defense runs its affairs. And this is massive fraud. It's a crime against the American people. And John is rightfully saying that we need to do something about this. Now, I'll end here by pointing out that he. Let me see if I can find this again. I'll post it in the comments below the video. But there's a. Here it is. So this is the letter or the document that he uses. I'll read it here, and it says your name, person's name, if elected as representative, senator, whatever, located in whatever area, hereby commit to endorse any policies and resolutions that exclusively support and promote the Peace Dividend Initiative, a concrete plan offering financial relief to U.S. citizens, and the transition from perpetual war and a permanent war economy to a legal and economic framework guaranteeing lasting peace and prosperity for the nation and all its citizens. A peace dividend was promised over 3 decades ago and is long overdue. This is true. Bill Clinton said that after the Soviet Union ended, they were going to be able to have this peace dividend. In lieu of that windfall, intended to serve the needs of the people and make life in our country healthful and harmonious, we have been subjected to gross squandering of our nation's wealth and tax dollars on unnecessary and illegal wars, expansion of the U.S. military as a global police force, the procurement of unneeded military assets, and the building of a super empire, none of which we as citizens of a democracy were ever informed of or given an opportunity to vote in. As a publicly elected official and a public figure, in order to address and remedy these egregious abuses of power, I will make every effort to have Congress immediately pass the necessary legislation to implement the Peace Dividend Initiative reforms crafted to reconfigure our military priorities and foreign policy, and to implement the Peace Dividend refund currently totaling $27,522 payable to each and every U.S. citizen. In the book, he goes into the detail of how he calculates that. If no other legislator comes forth to propose the necessary individual pieces of legislation, I will create and introduce my own initiative. Within 180 days of taking office, appropriate legislative acts to be submitted for consideration by Congress. I further understand and fully agree to the following. If I violate the above stated terms of the agreement, I will tender on the 181st day after taking the oath of office for my legislative seat my unconditional resignation from this elected position. Moreover, within 1 year of my resignation, I will refund all contributions made by the individual donors who supported my candidacy for this office. I sign this agreement voluntarily and with a full appreciation of all its obligations and responsibilities, and will honor this as a legally binding contract, my ironclad guarantee to serve my future constituents should they choose me as their elected representative. Signed and dated. This is interesting because I supported Tulsi Gabbard. I think it was in 2020, and she said some good things, I thought. But then when she lost the nomination, she threw her support to Joseph Biden, who stood for the exact opposite things that she said that she supported. And I wrote to her and I said, I didn't support you for you to throw your support to Joseph Biden. I want my money back. And guess what? I never heard from her again. So think about that for those of you who think that Tulsi Gabbard is an honorable politician. These people are all, they're all crooks. So that's what I have to say here, and I hope you'll take this to heart. This is a long shot, we have to admit, but we have to start somewhere. And the fact of the matter is that this was a slave-owning country. It was a country where 95% of the population, following the enactment of the U.S. Constitution, were denied the right to vote. Can you imagine that? These guys, they fought at Valley Forge, they fought, bled, and died in order to defeat the British and to create a new country. And then these jerks who actually created the Constitution denied these people the right to vote. You can die and bleed, but you don't get the right to vote. When you talk about taxation without representation, this is die for us, but you don't get representation. This is unacceptable. And of course, there were major rebellions that followed that, and eventually people did get the right to vote. But what happens in the system is that they always find a way to circumvent it through gerrymandering districts, or through the electoral college, or black box voting, where they rig the voting machines. There's all kinds of things they do. Both parties in order to rig the elections. So we're not. So this is a huge problem, and that's part of the whole, ball of wax that we have to deal with. So I'll end it here. Please, like and share my video. And if you'd care to, subscribe to my channel, that would be wonderful. Make a contribution if you'd like. I really appreciate that. And I will talk to you again soon. Thank you.